even though Stephen King is my second favorite author, he can be very irksome for me. This is the life I lead. Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So my last Stephen King video was all about my favorite Stephen King books that have terrible ratings on Goodreads. Now, this video is going to be all about my least favorite Stephen King books that have terrific ratings on Goodreads. And this video is going to be even more frustrating for me because a lot of these books I just feel are very overrated, and a lot of these books I just straight up don't like or hate, in fact. And just looking at how good these ratings are for these books compared to in my last video where there's books that I genuinely love reading, and they have terrible ratings or subpar ratings, it's very frustrating. But again, it's all very subjective. And I know that I'm very atypical when it comes to Stephen King opinions, so it doesn't really bother me too much, but if I sit down and think about it for a while, it just irks me. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we're going to start out with a book called Bag of Bones, which has a pretty good rating on Goodreads, 3.9. It's pretty decent, and I remember not enjoying this book at all when I read it. To be fair, though, it's been a very long time since I've read it. I think it's probably been like 5 years or so. I really didn't enjoy this book. I don't remember too much about it, if I'm being honest, but I don't remember enjoying it. I'm pretty sure I gave it 2 stars. So obviously I think it's overrated, but a lot of people, seem to really enjoy it. And I remember when I would watch, top 10 Stephen King videos on YouTube, a lot of people would put this in their top 10. And it was very surprising to me. So, out of all these books, I am interested in rereading it just to see, maybe I'll like it more. But for right now, I gave it 2 stars, and to see that it has a rating of 3.9, compared to like those books in the other video, it just, come on, people. These next 2 books are by far my least favorite of his short story collections, but they have a pretty solid rating on Goodreads, which again is, short stories in particular can be very subjective. So I'm not surprised that these have pretty decent ratings, but also kind of irks me just a little bit. But we got The Bizarre Bad Dreams, which, to be fair, there are decent stories in here. It's not, like, completely terrible, but it is one of my least favorites. This one, though, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, there's one really good one in here, and then there's a couple that are fine. But overall, this is such a chunky book, and it's supposed to be fucking short stories, and they're really boring and really tedious. And both of these, I think, are around like 3.93 something. Just way too high. I would probably give this one like 2.5 stars. I'd give this one a very generous 2 stars. It's just, I think they're overrated. They have their fans, obviously, but, they're not my cup of tea. But again, short stories out of all kind of like the writing craft are very subjective, especially when you have an author who's written over 200 short stories, so, I mean, these two could be someone's all-time favorite short story collections, whereas they're my least favorite. So those don't bother me as much. This next book does bother me a little bit, though. It's the third book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, End of Watch. And this is sitting at a 4.08, which is very good. And I think I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure this is the highest rated out of the Bill Hodges trilogy, which baffles me because the first book is pretty good. That's like a 3.5 star book. Finders Keepers is terrific. It's like a 4.5, 5-star book. But then this third book, it's no good in my opinion. It's a terrible ending to the series. He shoehorns in a supernatural element to like a mystery detective series that Stephen King routinely does this throughout his career, and it just bothers me like nothing else. So to see this book sitting at such a high rating, 4.08, it just doesn't sit well with me, and it's easily my least favorite of the trilogy. I don't understand why people love this book more than the first two books, especially book 2. I thought book 2 was amazing. But, it is what it is. Probably what it is people, they missed the supernatural elements in the first two books. They thought, these books don't have any horror elements. These are crappy. And then all of a sudden the third book, it gets introduced in here. They're like, oh, here we go, back to classic Stephen King. And I'm like, no, it was fine without it. And you can't, if you're going to have a trilogy, you can't introduce the supernatural element in the third book. That's just, God damn it. Even though Stephen King is my second favorite author, he can be very irksome for me. This is the life I lead. This next book, man, I don't want to talk about it, but because I know I'm gonna probably rant about it. That'd be the Talisman, sitting at 4.13. What? I know it has its fans. I know a lot of people love this book, but god damn it, this is the worst Stephen King book I've ever read, that I've ever managed to finish. 1.5 stars for me, and the overall rating on Goodreads is 4.13. Never have I ever wanted to burn a book so bad. Like I said, this is easily my least favorite King book that I've ever managed to finish, and the only Stephen King book I've never managed to finish is the sequel to this book, which makes perfect sense. It's just, Stephen King and Peter Straub set out at the time when they announced that they were going to co-write a book together. They were sort of like the biggest, or two of the biggest, like, horror authors of the time. I think this was like the late 70s, early 80s. So when people heard that they were going to write a book together, they're like, oh, it's going to be scary as shit. But then they end up writing this 700 fantasy piece of shit, and it's, I think it's bad. And I really think it's not so much Stephen King. I think it's Peter Straub, because there's definitely sections of this book that just does not feel like Stephen King's writing. There's passages in here that I'm like, there's no way in hell Stephen King wrote that. And it definitely shows. And obviously I think this book is overrated, so I'm going to try not to rant too much more about this shitty book. And Alan from the Library of Alexandria agrees with me, And I'm super glad to have someone agree with me on this because a lot of people love this book and I don't understand it. I think he even just told me that he doesn't even remember if he finished this book, which, you know, if you haven't, don't go back and read it, obviously. Uh, good God, man. Just can I just get rid of this book? Why do I own it? You know, I own all of Stephen King's books, even though there's a good amount of them that I don't like, and there's a good amount of them that I know I probably won't reread. What am I doing? And this next book is actually a part of one of my all-time favorite series, which is the Dark Tower series. And, you know, like I said, I love the series. And even though this is my least favorite book in the series, I don't hate it necessarily. But again, it's definitely my least favorite. And it is obviously highly rated on Goodreads. And that would be Wolves of the Kala, Book 5 of the Dark Tower series. And I think the first time, well, actually the only time I read the book, I gave it initially 2.5 stars. I think retroactively, though, I'd give it 3 stars. So, whereas all of the other books, I'm pretty sure I gave at least 4 stars to. You know, when I read the series, this was easily my least favorite. There's a giant section of this book that's dedicated to backstory of a character that I didn't really care that much about. And yeah, so I would give it at most 3 stars, and this has, you know, a 4.13 rating, which isn't, you know, I understand, because I think all of the Dark Tower books are rated pretty high. I think they're all over 4 stars. So it makes sense, but at the same time, I do think it's slightly overrated. The next book on here is kind of the same deal as Wolves of the Kala. I don't necessarily hate this book, but I definitely feel that it's highly overrated. And that would be one of his newer novels, The Institute. There it is. The Institute. I gave this book a solid 3 stars. Like, it has a really good start where he introduces his character for like 40 pages in the first chapter. And I really enjoyed his story. It was very brief, and then we don't see him again for another 300 pages. And the rest of the first half of the book is all from sort of different children's perspectives. And it was good. It was just, I was very perplexed as to why he would introduce that character the very beginning of the story and then just have him be absent for 300 pages. And I think I would have liked the book more if he would have sprinkled more of his perspectives throughout the book. You know, we get like 40 pages, boom, and then nothing. And you're like, well, where the hell is this guy? And then once you do eventually get reintroduced to him, sort of at the tail end of the book, you're like, okay, well, this is good. But yeah, I gave this book 3 stars, and on Goodreads, it's 4.2, which was very surprising to me. I thought people liked it, but I didn't think people liked it that much. Good Lord, 4.2. But yeah, so it's not like a gross overrating, but, you know, I gave it 3 stars, so I don't think I would ever give this book 4 stars. Definitely not 4.2. I did enjoy it, but not that much. And of course, the last 3 books on this list are very chunky books. They're books that I feel are just very overrated. They're very bloated, and a lot of people love these books. They're fan favorites, and I'm going to kind of shit all over them right now. So for this next book, I'm honestly surprised that it's not way higher, because it's extremely popular, especially kind of the resurgence it's had in the past 5 years or so. And I'm, of course, talking about It. And, of course, if you've seen any of my Stephen King videos, you'll probably know that I think this is one of his most overrated books. And on Goodreads, I thought this book would be rated way higher. It's sitting at a 4.25, and I thought it would be like 4.5, 4.6. I mean, people love this book. So to see it at a 4.25, I was pretty perplexed, because I thought it would have a much higher rating. And me personally, I would probably give it 3.5, maybe 4 stars if I'm being generous. So to see it at a 4.25 isn't necessarily like a way overrating, but a lot of people would put this in their top 5, their top 10, or their number 1 spot. I wouldn't even put it in my top 30. Like, Stephen King has way better books, in my opinion, way better paced books. The one thing this book has going for it is the characters. It has terrific character work, some of the best characters he's ever written. But overall, just the pacing is just not good. This should have been heavily edited, and the ending is awful. Like, there's so many parts about the ending that's just not good. And I hate when people like review this book and they're like, "Oh, it's 5 stars. It's the best book I've ever read. It's my favorite Stephen King book. Best scary book I've ever read. The ending's crap, but I just kind of skip over that." I'm like, "No, that's part of the book. You can't rate a book 5 stars if you hate the ending. Like, you can't do it." But people do it all the time, and people are like, "Oh, it's my favorite book, but I kind of just, gloss over the end." Like, what? It's like having a favorite movie, right? And then you just like pause and like skip a scene at the end. You're like, "Oh yeah, it's my favorite movie." Well, why'd you skip that scene? Like, "Oh, well, I don't like it." Well, then what? Okay, so maybe I am a little mad. So again, it's not a terrible book. It's just, in terms of, I think more so than the actual rating, because the overall rating isn't terrible, like 4.2. It's understandable. For me, it's overrated in that people would put it in their top 5 or top 10 or their number 1 spot. And again, I would never put this in my top 20, my top 30. Like, it's vastly overrated for me, and for that distinction. This next book, again, is easily one of the most overrated King books I've ever read. And I would probably give it 2.5 stars, maybe 3 stars if I felt really generous. But it's sitting at a 4.3, which I don't understand. But again, people love his chunky books, and this is definitely one of the newest chunky books he's written, and people love it, but I just don't. And that would be 11/22/63. And again, with most over-bloated Stephen King books, they have a terrific starting point. Like, the first, 300 pages of this book are actually quite well paced. Not perfectly paced, but it's well paced. For me, just the middle section of this book is just, like, I don't understand why people love it so much. I mean, I can understand if you like it, but, a lot of people say that this is their favorite, and that blows my mind. Because, it's a great premise, it starts out great, but the middle section is just so over-bloated. And again, it's one of those things where, like, if he only focused on, like, the main premise and didn't kind of veer away from it, like, this could have been an excellent, like, 500, 600 page book. It would have been incredible. But just for me, it's very overrated as it stands. And again, I would give it like a 2.5, and it sits at 4.3, and it probably has like, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 ratings. I have no idea, but a lot of people love this book, and I think it's one of the most overrated books King has ever written. And then, of course, we come to probably the most overrated Stephen King book there is. Oh boy. Not only does this book have such a high rating at 4.34, the amount of ratings is like staggering. And people absolutely love this book. And I think it's his most overrated book that I can think of. And that would, of course, be The Stand, which, again, pretty much very similarly to 11/22/63, it starts out so great. Like, it's split into 3 parts. And part 1 is superb, where you get introduced to Captain Trips and the pandemic that's happening, and you get introduced to all the characters. And it's really good. And then part 2 happens. And it bored the shit out of me. And then, of course, part 3, has some interesting stuff, but it has one of the worst endings, ever by Stephen King. It's one of the reasons why Stephen King is well known for having shitty endings, because of this book. And just, again, I know people love this book because of the characters. They love the characters. It's great. But, I need them to do interesting things. And if you have a boring book with characters not doing anything, I can read it, but I can't read thousands and thousands of pages of it. Where'd I put that book? I need an example here. Road Work here. People hate this book because, the character doesn't really do anything. But it's only for a couple hundred pages. But The Stand, it's, good Lord, people, it's huge. And there's just huge sections of this book where I'm just bored to tears. So yeah, obviously I think a 4.3 whatever rating for this is just way too high. I think I'd give it, again, 2.5, 3 stars. I am interested in reading the original version, the highly condensed version, which if you compare, the second parts to those book, part 2 in the condensed version is much shorter. So I feel that I would be able to stomach that more. So I do want to read that eventually, and I want to see if I like it. I'm sure I'll like it more than this literal brick of a book. So yeah, that's my final thoughts on The Stand. Very overrated, probably his most overrated book. Either this or 11/22/63. Very overrated. They have terrific ratings on Goodreads, and they're honestly some of my least favorite Stephen King books. All right, so that's my video on my least favorite Stephen King books that all have terrific ratings on Goodreads. Please let me know in the comments down below if you agree with any of my, rants here. If you think any of these books are overrated, or if you think they're underrated somehow. Or, what are your Stephen King books that you feel are overrated? Please let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching and have a terrific day.